Hi, 7th grade. Welcome back. Today is Thursday. I am making this video on Wednesday, so the exit ticket data is going to be a little off. Let's get started. So this one is Michelangelo's David. It was made by Michelangelo. It is made out of marble, and it does blend classical ideas with religion, because Michelangelo studied the classical sculptures. His sculptures look like they were made in ancient Greece or ancient Rome, but this is still a religious piece. Um, the David appears in the Old Testament. Which of the following was the influence of Renaissance sculptures? The answer to that is the classical period, right? If you look at a Renaissance sculpture, it looks like a classical structure. It looks like a classical sculpture from Greece or ancient Rome. This is the Moses. The Moses. I have a challenge for you. Michelangelo did horns on this guy. So email me and let me know why that might have happened. This is Moses. He appears in the Old Testament. He received the Ten Commandments from God, according to the Old Testament, and he freed the Jews out of slavery in Egypt. Again, very classically influenced, anatomically correct. You can even see his veins, right? Again, challenges for the horns. Where was Michelangelo from? He was from Italy. He was from Italy. Michelangelo wanted to be primarily known as a painter. Not a painter, I'm sorry. Take it back. He wanted to be known primarily as a sculptor, and it really shows the level of skill that he has as a sculptor. That does not mean that he's a bad painter. He's equally as good of a painter as he is a sculptor, but he wanted to be recognized as a sculptor. His paintings are incredible as well. Which of the following did Michelangelo do? This one is a very famous one. This one was made by Da Vinci. This is known as the Mona Lisa. Another Da Vinci by another painted by Da Vinci. And the last one, this is by Michelangelo. Okay, we're gonna be focusing on this one a lot today. Okay, so Michelangelo only did this one. Da Vinci did the other ones. Renaissance sculpture. So which of these is true about Renaissance sculpture? Only focus on religion? No. It focused on secular things as well. It did focus on the power of people and the ability of people. They were more realistic than medieval sculpture. And we're gonna skip these for now. I can show you guys the data. These are just from the text, right? Text features. Actually, let's do the first one. Read the sentence from the synopsis below. Which of the following selections from the article best supports the statement above? Michelangelo was recognized in his own time for his artistic mastery. Okay, let's look at some of the answer choices that you guys have. Okay, so these are some of the. It's not too bad, but there is more work to be done. So this one was text from the text. This one also came from the text. So for the most part, between 50 and 60% of students getting those questions right, and they tend to be harder. Actually, this one was not too bad. And the last question, it keeps jumping up. The last question, which of the following was not a skill Michelangelo had? He was not a doctor. Someone in my UC Davis class asked me, well, if he dissected bodies, does that make him a doctor? And the answer is no, because doctors are in the business of helping people, cure them, and keep them from getting ill. If you're dissecting people, you're not necessarily a doctor, okay? We're gonna go over this entire text, and then I have a couple of videos for you. We're focusing on Michelangelo today. So today we're focusing on Michelangelo. On Friday, we're gonna start focusing on other arts and how does it compare to the art from before. So we're gonna be focusing on Renaissance art and how is it different from medieval art. And I'll give you a preview of that today. Michelangelo was a famous Renaissance artist. He was an artist, a sculptor, poet, and architect. Some people might say that he is a Renaissance man, because a Renaissance man or woman is a person that is skilled in many different fields. For example, today he find a mathematician, a singer, an artist, an astronomer, someone that does plays. That can be considered a Renaissance man or woman. It's a person that has many different skills. He is regarded as one of the finest painters of the Renaissance, period. Probably one of the finest painters in history, period. He was born in, I'm going to just say Tuscany in Italy, 1475. He was raised in Florence. Some of the information that I'm giving you is similar to the one you did yesterday, or the one you did Monday. He was raised in Florence, although his father disapproved. His father disapproved of his interests in art. Michelangelo became an apprentice. An apprentice is someone that is learning, of an Italian painter, Domenico Ghirlandaio. Ghirlandaio was so impressed with the work of his apprentice that he recommended him to the ruler of Florence. Remember the Medici family in Florence? Michelangelo studied in the Medici's workshop for 3 years. During these years, Michelangelo gained a new perspective or a new insight. So perspective means idea or insight on arts, and met many prominent figures in arts and literature. He also painted his first important work. He didn't paint, he sculpted. Madonna of the Steps. So this is one of his first works, right? This looks like a relief. It says Madonna on the Steps, so it is the Virgin Mary. So again, this is a relief because it's only facing, you can only see it from one angle, from the front. It's attached to the wall. And he also did the Battle of Centaurs. So this is another one. You can see that this is when he first starts working, right? It's still not the master that he becomes. This still looks like it's from someone developing as a sculpture. In 1494, the Medici family was driven away from Florence. As a result, Michelangelo left the city of Venice, Bologna, and then Rome. In 1497, the people of the old world had just discovered, quote unquote, the new world. He sculpted Bacchus, the Roman god of wine. I'll show you a picture of him in a second. Bacchus would prove one of Michelangelo's only works involving pagan rather than Christian subjects. So pagan is from Rome, like Roman gods. Oh my God, this is awful. Roman gods. And this is Bacchus. So you see, he starts with this, and he's slowly developing as a sculpture, right? It's getting better as he has more practice and as he develops his skill. He next was commissioned. Commission means paid for, right? Like by someone that wants him to do something. By a French cardinal. So this is a word you should know. A cardinal belongs to the Catholic Church. Okay, and when a pope dies, the cardinals go into the Sistine Chapel, and they pick one of their own to be the new cardinal. So when the current pope dies, the cardinals are going to get into this chapel, and they're going to vote for one of the other cardinals to become the new pope. So this cardinal commissioned him to sculpt a marble depiction of Jesus resting on Mary's arms after the crucifixion. I think we know what this image is called. This is the Pieta, right? It was called the Pieta and was made under the cardinal's funeral monuments. It was made for the cardinal's funeral monument. Pieta can be viewed today in St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. So, you know, these works are really expensive to do. They take years. So it kind of shows you the power of the church, that the cardinals can just hire someone to make this monument. Okay. So Vatican City is located in Rome. It's the location of St. Peter's. This is the Pieta, and this is what I was showing you guys yesterday. You're able to see, even as the Virgin Mary's arms lift the dead Christ, you're able to see how his flesh lifts up. Okay, you're able to even see the veins on his arms. Right, look at the drapery. Look at the feet. It's really, he has a solid. I don't know how someone can be so skilled at creating something so realistic. That same year, Michelangelo moved back to Florence. He was then commissioned, there's the word commission again, to complete a marble statue of David started by Agostino de Duccio. The statue was to be a symbol of the Florentine Republic. Michelangelo finished the Colossal. So what do you guys think colossal means in this case? If it's something that's 14 feet tall, it's actually about 17 feet. Okay, something is 14 or 17 feet. Colossal in this case would mean large, very big. The statue was immediately recognized as a masterpiece, and it is considered one of Michelangelo's two greatest sculptures. Okay, here is a close up of his hand, the David's hand, and these are the veins of his hands. You're even able to see the wrinkles in the knuckles. You know how you have wrinkles in your knuckles. Okay, it's an amazing work of art. And here is the statue, and it gives you a comparison of how big it is compared to a person, right? It's a really, really large statue. So that's the David. In 1508, commissioned, there you go again, by Pope Julius II, Michelangelo began to work from which he became most famous for, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The elaborate or complex ceiling took 4 years to complete. Working on scaffolding, you'll see what that means in a second. High above the chapel floor, Michelangelo painted over 400 life-size figures on the ceiling in 1512. The ceiling featured 9 scenes, so 9 scenes from the book of Genesis. So as a creation. 7 Old Testament prophets and 5 sibyls. Sibyls are kind of like oracles from, I think they were from ancient Greece or ancient Rome. So he does include some Greek mythology in here. And these oracles are supposed to have predicted the coming of Jesus. Characters from Greek mythology. Of the Old Testament scenes, the creation of Adam is the most renowned. So think about what the word renowned means. Okay. So here's the ceiling. It's pretty huge. It's this part right here. Pick a different color. It's the top part. Okay. He does this one here eventually, this one. Okay. And here are some scenes. So again, we're gonna start thinking about the differences between medieval and Renaissance art. Renaissance is more realistic. It comes down to that. Renaissance is just more realistic than medieval. Think of like the evolution of games, right? How games looked 20 years ago versus how they look today. That's kind of like a comparison that I want to show you. Like 20 years ago, that's the medieval games, and today is like Renaissance, right? The differences are just very drastic. Renaissance, they have a much better understanding of the human body, and they want to celebrate people. They want to celebrate the environment. Here is probably the most famous one. This is the creation of Adam. On the left and on the right, you have Jesus. You have God. You have God, and then here you have Eve. So this is the creation of Adam. Here's another one. This is a little better. So the creation of Adam. Again, going back to understanding that this is a human being, and this is what people look like. Okay. This is an image. Let me black that out. This is an image. Sorry, guys. This is an image of Adam and Eve. It's part of the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, when God forbade Adam and Eve to eat from the forbidden fruit, right? And they disobeyed him. So here's the moment where they are disobeying him, and eventually they will be kicked out. I think this is the other scene. This is the other scene where they are kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Okay, so again, the images that appear in the ceiling come from the Old Testament. Those are some of the images. Okay, here we go. In the 1520s and 1530s, Michelangelo worked on several major projects, including the Grand Medici Chapel and the Basilica of San Lorenzo, fortification of the city of Florence, the Laurentine Library in Florence, and the frescoes of the Last Judgment. I'll show you a picture in a second of that one. The Last Judgment took 7 years to complete, so this one took a long time. and was the largest fresco of the Renaissance period. If you would like to know what a fresco is, please look it up. Let me know when you find out. This is the fresco they're talking about. So it's the Last Judgment, right? When those people that have not listened to God will be taken to hell, and those people that have listened to God will be taken to heaven. It really amazing piece. There's actually a self-portrait here of Michelangelo, and it's this one right here. He actually painted himself as a skin, like just as a piece of skin. Okay. Again, human emotion. Paintings in the medieval period lacked a lot of things, right? They were not very realistic. They did not really have emotion. And we'll talk about what does that mean that they were not realistic. But this is much more realistic, and you are able to see the pain in the eyes of this person, just in their mouth and in their eyes, because they have been condemned to go to hell. Moving on. As he worked on a massive fresco, Michelangelo met Vittoria Colonna, a female poet who became a close friend and inspired his own poetry. So Michelangelo was also a poet. I was going to put one of his poems here, but I figured it's going to be too long. In 1546, at the age of 71, Michelangelo was commissioned as an architect to St. Peter's Basilica and Dome. So he even worked on this dome. He wasn't the only one, but he was one of the people that worked on the dome. Michelangelo never married and remained in a relative state of solitude, alone, for most of his life. As he grew older, he cherished or he loved the solitude more and more. In 1564, Michelangelo died of a slow fever. He was buried in front of a large crowd in Santa Croce, a church in Florence. So here's another one of his sketches. He has a lot of sketches. He is an interesting human being. A lot of sketches, a lot of work that he left. Again, it's almost like the study of the human body, right? You see the muscles. And then I want to show you guys this. This is a medieval work of art. This is the Virgin Mary with Jesus. Okay, so that's them. So I want you to start thinking about, how does this compare to something like this or this? So I want you, because I can just tell you, but that's not going to help you really think about it. How does this compare to those ones that I showed you? How does this one, this is supposed to be this is another, these are both Middle Ages. How does this compare to the Last Supper of Da Vinci? Let's look at Da Vinci. How does that compare to this one? Right? How does that compare to this one? So we have this one. How does this compare to this? So think about it. I want you to think about it. I should have given you like a side-by-side. So I want you guys to think about the differences, right, between medieval and Renaissance. Let's watch these two videos. They're both con.
We're in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, which has tremendous importance to Catholicism.
So the Sistine Chapel, he's pointing at there. St. Peter's Basilica is on the, if you look at the right, at the left, there's a big dome there.
This is where the Pope will lead Mass, but perhaps most famously, this is the room that the College of Cardinals uses to decide the next Pope.
And every surface of this space is decorated, from the beautiful mosaics on the floor. The walls are painted with frescoes by early Renaissance artists. The wall behind the altar was painted by Michelangelo later in his life. And then, of course, the ceiling.
And everybody is looking up. Their necks are craned, and of course, it's magnificent. We're here in the late afternoon on a day in early July. The light is diffuse, and it makes those frescoed figures feel so dimensional. They feel like sculpture.
And you can Imagine what it was like when this was unveiled in 1512 after Michelangelo had worked on it for years, how different, how revolutionary Michelangelo's figures seemed.
Well, he was first and foremost a sculptor, and it wasn't actually until a relatively recent cleaning that we knew his brilliance as a colorist. But for him, line and drawing and the act of carving figures out of paint was primary, and you have this extraordinary ability to render both strength and elegance simultaneously.
They have a
So again, go back to strength, go back to beauty, go back to understanding humans.
massiveness and a presence that is charismatic, but there's also a sense of elegance and ideal beauty. So let's describe what we're looking at.
Okay, probably the most important are the series of 9 scenes that move across the central panels.
And those are framed by a painted architectural framework.
So you see these, he painted, but he also painted these columns. They look like they're real, but they're actually just painted.
That looks real. It doesn't look like paint. And we start with the creation of the world, God separating light from darkness.
I love that scene. This primordial God, light on one side of his body and the darkness of night on the other. This initial separation and division to create order in the universe.
And then we move through to the creation of Adam, the creation of Eve,
Well, the separation of the sexes.
and the creation of God's most perfect creature, human beings, and then the fall of human beings.
In a sense, the separation of good and evil.
Man and woman disobeying God, causing the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And then the far end, by the entrance, we see the scenes of Noah.
So these are all scenes from the first book of the Bible, from the book of Genesis. And it's so interesting because, of course, this is a Catholic church, and yet we don't see images of Christ. But these Old Testament scenes lay the foundation for the coming of Christ.
And Christ is present in other ways. Not only does the disobedience of Adam and Eve make the coming of Christ necessary, but when we look on either side of those central scenes, we see the prophets and the sibyls who predicted the coming of a Savior for mankind.
The image of the Libyan Sibyl that we're sitting directly across from is spectacularly beautiful. So Sibyls are these ancient pagan soothsayers who can foresee the future and, according to the Catholic tradition, foretell the coming of Christ. But look at the Libyan Sibyl. Look at the power of her body, and look at the elegance with which she twists and turns. There's that a sense of potential in the way that her toe just reaches down and touches the ground, but seems as if she's in the act of moving and possibly of standing.
There's a presence and drama to these figures, to the Libyan Sibyl especially. She twists her body in an almost impossible way, and we can see Michelangelo's articulated every muscle in the back, and in fact we know that he used a male model for that figure.
I'm so taken with the color here. When I first studied Michelangelo, we spoke only...
So pay attention to what they're saying about color as well, because you'll see that that's a huge difference between medieval and Renaissance. Some of the big differences you'll start to notice based on what I tell you, it's realism, secular versus religious, color versus not much color.
line of sculptural form, but of course after the dramatic cleaning of the Sistine Chapel, those original colors, their brilliance, their delicacy came out.
And we see purples and golds and oranges and blues and greens.
She, of course, is reaching back, and presumably that's a book of prophecy that she holds, and there's a look of confidence and knowing on her face, the absolute clarity with which she knows that Christ will come.
Sitting on the architectural framework on the four corners of all of the central scenes are male nude figures that we refer to as ignudi.
I think this is really important because Michelangelo is not painting simply separate paintings, but he's creating this enormously complex stage set with which to create levels of reality. And so, for example, the Libyan Sibyl seems as if she is seated amongst the architecture. and then set next to her are bronze figures. And then in the spandrels, as you mentioned, other scenes that seem to recede into a kind of illusionistic distance.
And then relief sculptures on the architecture on either side of her. And then seated above those, the Nude. And it's so clear that we're at this moment at the...
So I want you guys to see the so there's the Sibyl in the middle, and then there's like these sculptures. Those aren't real sculptures, they're painted on. So it looks really realistic.
Rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman sculpture, and Michelangelo is in Rome, he's in the Vatican.
This is the High Renaissance, and it's so interesting to compare the optimism, the elegance, the nobility of the figures on the ceiling with the far darker and more pessimistic view that Michelangelo will paint decades later on the back wall, The Last Judgment.
That's right. Well, there's a big difference between 1512, when Michelangelo completes the ceiling, and when he begins The Last Judgment. The Protestant Reformation has begun, and the church is under attack.
Michelangelo's world had been shattered, but when you look at the ceiling, you see instead all of the optimism, all of the intellectual and emotional power that characterizes the High Renaissance in all of its newfound appreciation for the ancient world. This was a moment of incredible promise, and all of that comes shining through these figures.
And let's not forget that just a few doors away, simultaneously, Raphael is painting the frescoes in the Papal Palace.
This one is something you're going to have to know. This is called the School of Athens, and you will be able to compare and contrast this one to medieval. One word that I want you to think about over and over again is the word perspective, or a sense of depth, or 3 dimensions. You can clearly see that there's a sense of 3 dimension here, right? You see the arches in the back. You can tell those are behind it. So that's going to be a huge part of our next week, where we analyze art.
So what a moment in Rome.
We're probably not gonna watch all of this one because the videos will be too long.
We're in the Accademia in Florence, surrounded by lots of people who have come to see the sculpture by Michelangelo of David. People love this sculpture, and people have always loved this sculpture.
But we're seeing it in a place that it was never intended to be seen, inside a museum. This sculpture was commissioned to decorate the outside of the cathedral,
which, for such a young sculptor, was an enormous honor.
You should know the name of this building. If you don't, it's Santa Maria del Fiore, and the dome was by Brunelleschi.
He was 26 years old.
The sculpture is so big because it was meant to be placed high up on the cathedral, 40 feet above street level. And so in order for it to be visible, it had to be big. Now, Michelangelo was given the commission just on the heels of his success in Rome, the Pietà. And it was such an outstanding success that the Florentines decided to give him an opportunity to carve an abandoned piece of marble, a huge block that had once been part of an earlier commission.
For decades, it had laid beside the cathedral, but in the early years of the 1500s, the government of Florence decided to look back 100 years to what had been considered the golden age of the Florentine Republic and commissioned sculptures once again for the cathedral.
A lot had happened in those intervening years. Florence was a republic, but one family in particular, the Medici, a banking family, took more and more control over the course of the 15th century until they were really sole rulers of the city, but still under the guise of the republic. Late in the 15th century, they were run out of town.
And a republic was reestablished. But this happened right at the time of the ascendancy of a very charismatic monk named Savonarola, who essentially began to turn the newly reconstituted Republic of Florence into a theocratic state.
Savonarola believed that Florence had gone astray in part because of its wealth. And an expression of that wealth was its interest in humanism, its interest in the arts, and he's probably most famous for the bonfire of the vanities. That is, his effort to rid the city of what he saw as the corruption of wealth, burning manuscripts, burning paintings. But Savonarola's rule of Florence does not continue. He's excommunicated by the Pope Pope put under arrest, and ultimately he's executed, and then his body is burned.
The Florentine government defeats two tyrants. They defeat first the Medici and then Savonarola. And so it's critical to see the sculpture of David against that background, especially because the biblical figure of David meant something very special to the Florentine people.
The Bible tells us that David was a young shepherd, and his people were being attacked by the Philistines. It seems certain that the Israelites will be defeated, especially since none of their warriors are willing to go up against this giant of a man, Goliath. David, this young shepherd, is willing to. He takes off his armor before he goes into battle. He picks up a stone, places it in his sling, hits Goliath between the eyes, fells the giant, and then cuts off his head with the giant's own sword.
It's a story of good overcoming evil through God's favor. And the people of Florence identified with David. They saw themselves as an underdog like David, who had consistently defeated their enemy.
So I don't want you to think that in the Bible David is nude or naked. He's not. That part comes from the classical ideas of human beauty, human power. So that's why he's a nude, right? Because Michelangelo is influenced by these classical ideas.
Because of God's favor.
And because this story was so potent to the thinking of the citizens of Florence, Michelangelo's sculpture was not the first to embody these ideas. Donatello, Verrocchio had both produced sculptures of the young David that spoke to the virtues of the city of Florence.
Donatello's David had in fact been commissioned by the Medici and had stood in their garden. Now, as soon as the Medici were ousted, the government of Florence went into the Medici palace, took David, and appropriated him as a symbol for the Republic.
The subject of David could not have been more potent when he sets out to carve this piece of abandoned stone.
The other important piece to this is the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman culture that happened especially under the patronage of the Medici, and especially for Michelangelo, this love of ancient Greek and Roman sculpture and competing with those ancient models.
Florence wanted to see itself as the inheritor of the great humanist traditions of ancient Rome, and the very stance of the sculpture, with his weight on the right leg, is taken directly from classical antiquity. This is a stance that we call Contrapposto.
Now, in the earlier versions, we're looking at David after the fight. We're looking at the moment of victory, and he looks youthful and confident.
And contemplative, introspective, it's a moment of rest after the act.
But here, the moment when David looks across space and readies himself for the fight ahead.
Sometimes this is described as a pregnant moment, as this moment in immediate anticipation of action, a moment that signals what's about to happen. When I look at this sculpture, I see his hips forward, his shoulders are forward, but his head is at 3/4, it's turned, and if you look closely, his eyes are turned even further. If I do this, it's only comfortable for a second. He's just caught his first glance of his enemy.
Although the face has this very powerful sense of the uncertainty of the future, the pose itself of Contrapposto is a relaxed one.
It's almost as if he had been at rest, and now his body is just being filled with the tension that...
We'll stop there. Please continue working hard. Please make sure to push yourselves for getting 70% on the Ed Puzzle video and at least 70% on the exit tickets. You guys are doing great. I'm really proud of the work you guys did on the interim. It was really awesome. You guys did a great job, and I hope that continues into SPEC. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.